Prabhupada mentions in a letter, he said he actually preferred devotees to ask questions rather than speculate, because there's so many topics in deity worship, and there's so many different nuances with deity worship, and yeah, a lot of times devotees don't understand different things. It's quite simple, most of it. And of course, Prabhupada, in his teachings of deity worship, he emphasized two things. Does anyone know what the two things are? Huh? Cleanliness, very good, and punctuality. And so these have particular functions. Cleanliness is about us becoming purified. Punctuality is about us becoming regulated. But purification, there's a nice purport in the Gita where Prabhupada, I think it's in the 13th chapter, where Srila Prabhupada talks about what cleanliness means. And he said it means taking bath 3 times a day and chanting Hare Krishna. So external is bathing, internal is chanting the holy name. So a very, very important element of deity worship. And Prabhupada mentions also in one place that if we're always attentive to cleanliness and punctuality, then Krishna will be happy to accept our offerings. So this is such an essential part of deity worship, is to cultivate cleanliness, and ultimately which leads to purity. So very, very important to focus on that. And so here at the school, we teach, I think, 12 different subjects here in the course of 16 weeks. And the last topic we deal with is deity worship in the temple. That goes for 3 weeks. And so out of the 20 plus classes we do, 5 of those classes are about cleanliness. How cleanliness helps us to approach the Supreme Pure, how, all the elements of the external cleanliness, preparing for worship in the morning, things like that. Mantras, meditation, how to clean paraphernalia, all these different things and their connection with deity worship. I don't think there's really any qualification as such. Hare Krishna, welcome. I mean, there are some minor rules, like generally with a Nrrsimha Kavaca. The Kavaca means the capsule, yeah? And inside the capsule, you'll see I've got it written down on my computer what's inside, but there's the tulsi leaf from the Sringadeva's lotus feet, and there's the mantra Ugram Viryam Mahavishnu, written on a special piece of bark, a few other little bits and pieces inside that capsule. And the mantra is obviously non-different from the deity. And so with ladies, they wear on the upper arm on the left, and men, they wear on the upper arm on the right. Yeah. And then as far as a pavitra, you know what a pavitra, everyone knows what a pavitra is? That's those, sometimes devotees call them Hiranyakashipu's intestines. Yeah, they think there's something to do with Hiranyakashipu, but actually, these are they usually they do offer to the Nrrsimha more often, but usually they're offered on Pavitra Panakodasi. This is the main time they're offered, and they're made from silk cord. And you mostly see devotees wear them the wrong way around, because usually the tassel part goes at the back and it comes down the front. But it's not really important, I don't think, but that's how they should be worn. And what happens is like on Pavitra Panakodasi, devotees perform bratas of chanting extra rounds, and then they offer that to the deity. But also they offer these pavitras. And I sometimes, when I was in Australia as a head pujari, I would get these pavitras and I'd make a garland for our Krishna deity, Govardhanadhari, with these pavitras, and he'd wear them, and then we'd raise funds for the deities with these pavitras. So there's no real rules. The other thing really is about, ladies wear on the kavacha on the left and men wear on the right.
Kids also, boys, small kids?
Yeah, no problems.
Not
You can wear on the neck also. But you'll see, it's quite common in West Bengal. I'm not sure about other parts of India, but it's quite common in West Bengal. You'll see that they wear on the upper arm. Generally not around the wrist, because the wrist, you're working, you're doing things. One thing you'll see also quite common these days is devotees like to wear, threads like Brahmin threads, or when you're involved in some sort of festival, like when we do an Adivas, for instance, and they put this thread around, this red and yellow thread around the wrist. I remember years ago, it was when Bhakti True Maharaj and Tamal Krishna Maharaj were present. I remember hearing Bhakti True Maharaj telling Tamal Krishna Maharaj that Prabhupada was not in favor of this, because devotees at the time, during Prabhupada's time, were wearing Brahmin threads around their wrist, and Prabhupada said it's like hippies. So Prabhupada didn't like it. So it's not something Prabhupada was in favor of. Of course, you wear it for the period, like when for instance, here we do an Adivas before major festivals. There's 5 major festivals they do Adivas before, and so you put the Pavitra, or not the Pavitra, but the thread, the sutra around your wrist. You wear it for the duration of the festival, and then after the festival is a ceremony. Not many people follow it, but there is a ceremony of removing that. And the idea is that it's like a contract between you and the deity. So you've been there for the Adivas. The purpose of the Adivas is to petition the Lord to accept our offering, our service. And Janani Basra would often explain how we're also humbly begging the Lord to come and reside in our heart, so we become purified. But then, and so that then means that you will participate in the festival the next day, attend the festival, and then when the festival's finished, you usually take it off. I mean, I've got a few of them from different installations and stuff. I got one when I was in Mauritius last year, and I've still got it tied on the handle of my backpack, just because it was a nice installation. So, I see it and I remember the installation, but I don't want to wear things like that around my wrist. Even like they give us, these little, where are they? Anyhow, those little bands they put around your wrist when you do different, go to do, like here for the SGGS and stuff. I just keep them in my pocket because I don't like wearing things like that around my wrist.
Same for Kavaca.
Okay.
If we want to leave some friends and family who don't follow vegetarian, can we still give them?
Yeah, because you can definitely give things like Kavachas and Pavitras to friends and family, because it will help to purify them. Because these are the Mahaprasad of the deity. And like I said, there's no, as far as I've experienced, there's no strict rules with these things. Like some devotees might say, oh, you shouldn't wear them in bathrooms and things like that. But I don't know there's a rule like that. For us, we might think, okay, we should. But so often you see devotees wearing shirts with pictures of Krishna and things like that on them, and they wear them into the bathroom. If you want to be really strict, you wouldn't do that. Even like, if you have a picture of Krishna on your T-shirt and you're going to pay obeisances, so you're lying down on top of Krishna, because the picture is not different from the Lord, because it's a form of the deity. It's like, there's 8, in the Bhagavatam, in the 11th canto, it's described there's 8 forms of the deity. So a painting or a picture is one of those forms. So you can understand it's non-different. It really depends what your idea is, and there's many points of consideration here. The first point to consider is: are you part of a temple community? If you're part of a temple community, it's better you get involved in the temple in the worship at the temple. There's in the mid to late 70s, Prabhupada wrote quite a few letters in this regard, where he was encouraging devotees not to have deities at home, but rather to worship the deity in the temple. Because and especially like, okay, in a temple like this, where you've got a huge community, there's 7,000 plus devotees here, and there's not much scope for getting involved in the worship of the temple, you might think that possibly there is some justification for having deities at home. And I know many devotees do have deities at home. However, Prabhupada did really want everyone to get involved in the worship of the temple. And he explained to one of his leaders, he said that if everyone worships the deity in the temple, then the activities of the society will pull on nicely. So if we're all focused around the deity, then this is really going to help the society to flourish. In Vrindavan, Prabhupada set up the standard there where, I don't know if anyone remembers, everyone here's been to Vrindavan, yeah? So at the back of Prabhupada's house is a garden. You know this garden? So there used to be, they've changed it now, but there used to be like at the back of the garden on the wall that's adjoining the Acadia land, there was a roof halfway along the wall, like some corrugated roof, and there was a wall there. That was a passageway that went from the restaurant in the ground floor of the guest house through to the altar area, to the deity apartment. And the idea Prabhupada wanted was that everything was cooked in the restaurant was offered on the altar to the deities. He also explained to the devotees in Vrindavan that, because there was grihastas living around the temple at that time, that everything that the devotees cooked in their house, they should offer on the altar. Because he wanted the community to focus around the deities. But if we all focus around our own home worship, then the community becomes fragmented. So it's better if we focus on the temple deity and don't have our own worship. However, we've experienced in ISKCON that many devotees do have their own worship, and so then we need to ensure that that's done properly. And so as far as having deities when you have small children, I guess it really depends, as parents, are you able to manage both? Are you able to manage the children and the deities at the same time? Because especially with young children, they can be quite demanding. Unless you're very good at training your children to sort of behave properly, or be regulated in their habits and stuff like that, which is difficult with children. But they can be quite demanding and they want a lot of attention. And usually when you have children, the children are the center of attention. When you have deities, the deity should be the center of attention, so it's difficult. But, I've seen devotees, for instance, when, if you have young children, especially in Australia, we have this expression, the terrible twos. When they're 2 years old, they're really, really difficult to deal with sometimes, and they're crying, and they also go through, these anamoy, pranamoy, gyanamoy, these different stages. So when the children are at this anamoy stage, they experience everything through the tongue. So everything they want to experience what it is, what do? They stick it in their mouth. And they don't have discrimination, so they'll be grabbing things off the altar and putting them in their mouth. So I've seen some devotees, when they have altars at home, the altars are 6 foot up the wall, so the kids can't get to it. So, you can potentially look at things like that. Nothing should be down low where the children can grab, especially young children. But then as far as children being involved in the deity, it's become quite common in ISKCON that, devotees will get deities for young children. And then they'll quote the examples of Uddhava, Parikshit, and Srila Prabhupada. Prabhupada had deities when he was quite young. But it's quite likely that our children are not the same caliber of devotee as Srila Prabhupada or Uddhava or Parikshit or any of these great souls. These are all Nityasiddha devotees. There's a description in the beginning of the 3rd canto how Uddhava, he was given deities. And Prabhupada talks about it as childhood play, but if you actually look at what was happening, it wasn't childhood play. His mother, Uddhava's mother, would call him to come for prasad. He says, "No, mother, I can't come because the deity's offering is still going on." What children do you know who are like that? As soon as the idea of eating is there, they run off to eat. They forget completely about the deity, etc. And, I've seen this so many times. I visited friends, and you look on their altars and they have, half a dozen, like each child they have a Ladu Gopal on the altar because they gave the child a Ladu Gopal when they were young. But now the Ladu Gopal is just neglected. It's being worshipped by the parents. They're missing eyes and things like that. So generally speaking, it's not a good idea to give children deities. Prabhupada recommended, usually he would say 12 years old, 10 years old, something like that. 10 years old, you can start to educate them with deity worship. When they get to the point of 12 years old, then you can get them initiated and start to train them, involve them in deity worship. But before that, they don't really understand. It's just like a doll. I had an experience years ago. I was in one temple. There was a young girl there. She's probably about 4, 5, 6, something like that. And she had a Ladu Gopal deity. So I was talking to her and asking her about a deity and, what sort of things she did for the deity. And so she was explaining how she worshipped the deity. And at one point, she said, but sometimes he's very naughty. Well, that's interesting. What do you mean by he's very naughty? He said he likes to play in the mud. So you can imagine she's playing with the deity in the mud. So obviously the proper mood of worship's not there. She's not understanding this relationship of Aishwarya, that he's the master, I'm the servant. So this is I personally feel that this is detrimental to the child, because then they grow up with the wrong idea of what is the relationship. Because it's very important in our purification that we understand what is our relationship with Krishna. And we see that Prabhupada really clearly explains this at the end of the 10th chapter of the Gita, how there's this relationship of awe and reverence, that he is the master, I am the servant, a menial servant, and Krishna, he's the master. And so if you want to really help your children to develop a good understanding of deity worship, don't give them deities when they're children, when they're young. Wait till they get a little bit older and they can start to understand the philosophical concepts that are involved. They can start to understand who it is they're worshipping. Not that it's a doll, but it's actually the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Because the thing is, with any of these kind of vidi kind of practices, because it's Pancharatric vidi, or Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti, that governs deity worship, in order to get the result, you have to follow the process. There's a really nice verse in the, I can't remember what chapter it is, I think it might be the 6th chapter in the 10th canto, where, the chapter, actually it might be later, it might be the 14th chapter or something. The story of the Indra Yagya, where the cowherd men, they want to offer worship to Indra, but Krishna's saying, no, you should worship Govardhan Hill. So in there, Krishna, he's quite a tricky fellow. But in there, he's trying to convince Nanda Maharaj and all the cowherd men not to worship Indra, but to worship the Govardhan Hill. And so he says to his father, Father, why are you doing this yajna for Indra? Oh, son, I don't know. It's just a tradition we have in our family, in our dynasty. And then Krishna goes on to explain. He says, some people know why they do an activity, some people don't. Those who don't know don't get benefit from the activity, but those who know get the benefit from the activity. So we can understand the same in all our devotional practices if we understand what is the function of the devotional practice, especially when it comes to following different rules and regulations. If we understand why we follow the rules and regulations, then we'll get the benefit. Of course, things like chanting Hare Krishna, etc., they're just purifying no matter what you do. If we simply chant Hare Krishna no matter what, there's no rules and regulations with chanting Hare Krishna, you're going to benefit from it. But with things like deity worship and especially these things which are governed by vidi, if you follow the rules, you'll get the benefit. If you don't follow the rules, there's no benefit. So that's why, one time Prabhupada was explaining to the devotees some of the rules of deity worship. And they said, oh, Swamiji, there's so many rules. And Prabhupada said, if I told you all the rules, you'd faint. Because there's so many rules in deity worship. But a lot of the rules aren't very important. But some rules are very important. So in the deity ministry, we tend to try to identify what are the important rules, the things, the principles that we have to follow. For example, cleanliness and punctuality. We really put a lot of emphasis on those. And Prabhupada explained there's 5 things that are most important in deity worship. There's cleanliness, there's punctuality, there's nice bowl offerings, beautiful dresses. Like if you go to our Mayapur Divine Threads dress shop, you'll see the quality of the dresses we make there are just first class. And there's also nice flowers and scents. These are the important elements of deity worship. These are the things in the ministry we really try to emphasize. Of course, we teach devotees how to do ritual, but the ritual is simply the vehicle for offering our bhakti. It's not the conclusion of deity worship. Becoming expert at the ritual is not the conclusion of deity worship. It helps us to achieve the conclusion. The real conclusion is to develop our loving relationship and to understand that the deity is a person. This is really what we need to focus on in deity worship.
Something in this regard. I've heard that, is it so that some devotees say that when kids are small, then it's comparatively it's better to invite Jagannath or Subhadra because it's easier to manage or they take less offenses. Is there a difference? Should we say like this that these deities will take less offenses?
No, it's the thing is because it's vidi, because it's governed by rules. If you break the rules, you get reactions. That's the same with Gaur Nitai. Like sometimes devotees will say things like, oh, but you worship Gaur Nitai with kirtan. That's true, Gaur Nitai like kirtan, but there are a number of places where Prabhupada said, he told Sri Dhanana Maharaj, he says, no, you cannot install Gaur Nitai because you don't have enough Brahmins. So does that mean you need to be a Brahmin to chant Hare Krishna? No, it means you need to be a Brahmin to worship the deity because it's governed by Vidi. And the Vidi explains that in order to worship the deity, you need to have mantra. I mean, this is obviously particularly related to the temple, but in order to worship the deity, you need to have mantra. Because whenever you offer an item to the deity, you might say, etat padyam, and you say, klingoraya namaha. You'll say the mula mantra of the deity. So it's necessary. And like, to give children Jagannath or Gaur Nitai or any deity, my personal experience and my personal belief is it's detrimental to the child because they don't understand who they're dealing with. It's just like, I saw a case, I think it was last year, where the child had a gun. And the child shot someone with a gun because he thought it was a toy. And so it's the same kind of thing. If you give a child something like a gun, they're going to cause havoc because they don't know how dangerous the gun is. So in the same way, if we give a child a deity because they don't understand the process of deity worship, it's going to be ultimately detrimental to them because they won't imbibe the proper mood or the proper relationship in the worship of the deity. So it's very detrimental in my experience. So regarding doing Mangal Aarti at home, it really depends a lot on your particular domestic situation. For instance, some devotees might do shift work, meaning that they start work at 8 o'clock at night and finish work at 8 o'clock the next morning or something. So obviously they're not going to be offering Mangal Aarti at 4 a.m. or 4:30. So it really gets down to what's happening in your life, and you can plan accordingly. There are statements from Prabhupada like, one who cannot rise early is not serious about spiritual life, which is true, because if it's possible for us to rise early, we need to rise early. It's an essential aspect of the devotional process to perform tapasya in order to purify us. Tapo dibyam putrakayena shatvam. We perform tapasya and it purifies the heart. And the purpose of the tapasya is not just to perform austerities, but it's tapo dibyam. You perform divine austerity or austerity to understand the divine. The purpose of performing the austerity is to gain knowledge about the divine or Krishna. So that's the point. So we do perform austerity, but for the purpose of understanding Krishna. So Mangal Aarti can be flexible. Generally, in terms of the vessels, I guess this is asking about the materials that puja vessels are made from. Usually copper is probably one of the best metals. It mentions in the scriptures that copper is Krishna's favorite metal. Yeah, so it mentions in scripture that copper is Krishna's favorite metal. Sometimes devotees think silver or gold is, but actually more than gold, Krishna likes copper.
Brass is okay.
Brass is okay, yeah. I mean, I'll explain all the different metals that you can use. When Hanks Avatar brings in, I'll show you the different metals that are there. You can use brass, you can use bell metal. Thank you, just put it here. So this one is copper. These were cleaned a few days ago, so they're not really that clean. But you can see like copper is actually quite an attractive metal when it's clean. Yeah? And is Krishna's favorite metal. My theory, I have no scriptural evidence to support this, but my theory on this is one of the reasons Krishna likes it is because it takes a lot of effort to keep it clean. So in order to use the copper paraphernalia, we have to do lots of service. Yeah? So it gives us increased opportunity to serve Krishna. Whereas with silver, you don't have to clean it as much. And so that's my theory. But yeah, it's very nice. They're copper. This one's bell metal. And I'll show you how you can tell bell metal from other things. You see how it rings? That's bell metal. Yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe it is Panchalova. Yeah, but yeah, it's got a nice ring to it. Whereas when you have brass, for instance, this is brass. Quite a bit flat, you know. But interestingly enough, most of the bells you buy in the marketplace are not made of bell metal. They're made of brass. But when you get a bell that's made of bell metal, it's quite a nice sound. So there's so many different types of metal you can use. These are also bell metal. You hear it ring? Yeah? These are bell metal. Yeah? One of the things with bell metal, though, you have to be careful is not to drop it because it cracks quite easily. Yeah? So, especially with a bell, if it cracks, it doesn't have a nice sound. There's also brass. Yeah. So there's a variety of metals you can use. I wouldn't recommend using aluminium. Aluminium is not a very high-class metal. I have heard that Prabhupada called it metal stool. He wasn't very impressed with aluminium. Sometimes you can also use stainless steel. That's also good. But of course, you can use silver, gold. One of the problems with silver and gold is people do tend to want to steal it because it's, especially gold. I think an ounce of gold is $2,000 or something. It's quite expensive. What's the height of the home puja room for the deities? Yeah, I remember one place I was visiting. We're doing a seminar on home deity worship, and there was this idea within the community that the altar had to have 3 steps. But there's no rules like that, because sometimes you'll see like devotees' altar is just a shelf on the wall, and they just put everything, the deities and the pictures of Parampara are all on the same level. Sometimes they might have a cupboard. One time I was visiting a couple in Mumbai, very wonderful couple, and my wife and I went for prasad, and they had a square, like not square, but a box on top of the fridge. When I first went in there, I thought it was a microwave. It looked just like a microwave, and the deities were in there with the door. And then I realized it was actually a cupboard they made for the deities, and the door closed when they put them to sleep at night. So, and actually, when we do the home deity worship course, I have a slideshow that shows altars that I've seen from all around the world, and they come in all shapes and sizes. There's even one place I visited in Mumbai. There's a wealthy family, but they lived on the Esplanade in Mumbai, which I don't know if is anyone here from Mumbai? No, so Esplanade is quite a wealthy kind of place to live, a very affluent area. And so we went in there, and as you open the door opens this way, and they've got this beautiful altar room, deity room on the side there, on the right-hand side. So as soon as you open the door, you can see Radha Krishna. And so they had Radha Krishna and I think Gaur Purnima and some smaller deities as well. Very, very beautiful. We went to a place in Nasik one time, Janani Raspa and myself, and did an installation. They installed Panchatattva, Radha Madhav, and Jagannath Baladev Subhadra. There's a whole big program, So, and they had a deity room and everything, And so, it really depends on your situation, especially with home worship. There's not like there's any strict rules on it. So you just have to look at what situation you have at home, what facilities you have, and see, one of the things really that determines your standard of worship at home is how much time you have to give to deity worship every day. And this is an important point in home deity worship, because sometimes you'll see devotees that worship the deity once a week or once a fortnight, on Ekadasis or once a month. But according to our acharyas, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, we sing this every morning, Sri Vigrahara Dana Nityanana. So Nitya means daily. It means regular or it means daily. Prabhupada, you can see there's many places where he quoted this verse, and he says daily, not weekly, not monthly, every single day. So Sri Vigrahara Dana Nityanana Sringara Tan Mandira Marjanado. So it means you dress the deities every day. Mandira Marjanado means you clean the temple every day, or you clean the altar every day. This is what deity worship is about. It's about a regulated offering of service to the deity. according to the rules and regulations given in the Shastras. And we see in the seventh canto, chapter 14, it describes there how when Narad Muni and the other sages, they saw that people were becoming disrespectful in their dealings, they introduced deity worship to help people to become cultured, to help people become regulated. So deity worship is a really important element to help us to cultivate our devotional practice if we follow it properly. If we don't follow it properly, we'll commit offences, and that'll be detrimental. So it's really important that we follow the process properly. And essentially this means to be clean, to be punctual, to be regulated, to treat the deity as a person. And in terms of home standards, generally it means that every day you bathe and dress the deities, you'll offer Aarti to them, you'll offer them something to eat every day, have a kirtan. And if you want to do more, that's fine, but never less. There should always be those basic things every day. Every day you bathe them, every day you dress them. But see, bathing, you don't have to polish, like if you have brass deities, you don't have to polish them every day. You can polish them once a week or once a fortnight, that's fine, but every day you should bathe them. Bathing deities takes you 10 minutes, literally. You just bathe them 3 conches of water, you can chant Govinda Jaya Jaya, Brahma Smita, Hare Krishna, whatever works for you, then dry them, put fresh clothes on. You don't have to do elaborate ornamentation, even just some simple earrings and a necklace or something like that's fine. You don't have to do the full, like you see Radha Madhava with 2 garlands and this thing and that thing. That's beyond the capacity of most people. So the first thing you need to do when you're contemplating having deities at home is really seriously look at how much time can I give to this activity every single day. And then if you say, well, look, maybe 10 minutes a day, probably deity worship or having 3-dimensional deities is not the right thing for you. Maybe you're better off with a picture altar, so you can offer Bolga every day. I mean, every home should have an altar. That's a fact. But who you put on the altar, this really, you're going to work out by how much time you have. So if you have plenty of time, if you have an hour or 2 a day, then great, have deities. But if you've got 5 or 10 minutes a day, then just have pictures. You can wipe the pictures down every day, clean them, wipe the altar, and offer food. But really, you need to look carefully at how much time you want to put in there. So the question is about what sort of deities should we have? There's so many different types of deities. There's deities made of resin or fiberglass. There's deities made of marble, of wood, of brass. So what should we have? It really, again, it gets down to your situation. There's no standard as such. If, for instance, you have the capacity to worship deities and you travel a lot, you might want to consider shaligrams. Obviously, if you're a Brahmin Diksha, because shaligrams, they're very convenient. You can worship and offer 16 items of worship very simply, very quickly. Then you pack them up in a box and you can travel with them. Prabhupada would sometimes call shaligram worship box worship. So his father would have shaligrams, he'd worship them and put them back in the box. So you can do that. If you have more facility, if you have a place where you can set up a nice altar, etc., you might consider brass deities. Marble deities. If you travel and luggage, the weight of luggage is a concern, you might want to look at wood deities. Traveling with brass deities has complications because average set of brass deities is going to weigh 7 or 8 kilograms for a 10-inch deity, or maybe even 10 kilograms, so they're quite heavy. So, if you want to carry the deities in your hand luggage, which, normally you wouldn't want to put the deities under a plane if you're traveling, then, brass deities are not the best option. So, there's just so many considerations there. There's no real strict rules with these things. And there's a purport in the Bhagavatam 2.3.22 where Srila Prabhupada lists all the different types of deities that he's recommending devotees should worship at home. And he mentions Krishna, Radha Krishna, he mentions Sitaram, Lakshman, Hanuman, Lakshmi Narayan, Nrsimha. I mean, so many different forms, Varaha, Shaligram, Shila, that he's recommending devotees worship at home. So there's no real strict rule on it. Even like these resin deities can be worshipped. The only thing I would suggest is better if the deities aren't hollow. Sometimes, like in our storeroom here, we have different deities that devotees do worship with, and we've got 2 sets or 3 sets of deities which I believe are hollow because they're quite lightweight. So if you get metal deities which are light, then generally you can understand they're hollow. These are probably the first deities I got here. But yeah, that's the only thing I would think would be a thing. And also you need to consider things like we do actually an analysis of comparing and contrasting the different types of deities in one of our courses, and things like you look at marble deities. Usually, the features of marble deities are very attractive, but one of the things with marble deities is they break very easily, and you get if you get a set of deities like this high, they're going to weigh probably 100, 120 kilograms. They're not light. So there's a bit of weight to them. Brass deities, they're much more durable, but they're heavy and they're hard to move around. Wooden deities, much lighter, but also you need to be careful with them. You can't bathe them normally. You might bathe them occasionally, but not normally. And they do break also. And deities like Jagannath, depends where you get the deities from. If you get deities anywhere else in India, apart from Puri, then generally it's not a problem. If you get deities made in Puri, they have a process there whereby they assemble the wood part of the deity, then they wrap them with cloth, and they put special types of herbs under the cloth, which is supposed to be protecting the deity and things like that. But then after a few years, and they smear mud over the top of that, and they paint it. So what happens after a few years is the mud gets really dry and it starts to crack. And you might have seen sometimes Jagannath deities where the paintwork's cracking and falling off. And there's not really much you can do to repair them. So usually you find in Puri, the deities are replaced every 11, 12, 13 years. So, when you're buying deities, you have to kind of look carefully at what it is you're getting. You're getting brass deities, see how heavy they are. Stuff like that. Yeah. A lot of it's, in my experience, is just practical experience. Yeah. And that's one of the things I was talking with someone about this the other day, one of the GBC members, how Prabhupada was very practical. And he encouraged his disciples to worship the deities very simply. He told Jamuna that if you follow this simple process of deity worship that I've given you, it's enough to take you back to Godhead. So all we have to do is just follow what Prabhupada gave us. It'll take us back to Godhead. It's a simple thing, but it's also quite challenging because we have our conditioned mind and conditioned senses. He told Giriraj Maharaj, he said that deity worship is not the process for this age. If we get too caught up in the deity worship, because deity worship is very important for us. Jiva Goswami explains it's very, very important because it helps us to purify the mind and senses. But Prabhupada explained, if we get too much caught up in the deity worship, we'll forget what the process for the age is. We'll forget that chanting Hare Krishna is the process. Deity worship it has a support function, if you like, for chanting. It helps us to become purified because the goal is to get to the point of understanding that the name is non-different from Krishna. If we can understand the name is non-different from Krishna, you don't need to do deity worship. You don't need to get initiated. But because we don't accept that, because we don't understand, there's Nama Chintamani Krishna's Chaitanya Rasa Vigraha. That it's not a material name, it's directly the Supreme Person of God. Because we don't understand this, we need to follow different processes of purification. And deity worship is very, very powerful because you're directly touching Krishna. You're directly, if you do a fire yaga, just like we had a fire yaga in the TOVP the other day for Nrsimha, for opening the Nrsimha wing. Who saw the deity in the fire? Did anyone there see Krishna in the fire? No, you just saw the flame and Swaha, you saw all that sort of stuff. But none of us perceived Krishna in the fire. So that process is not very effective for us. It's helpful, but it's not very effective. And the same, we look in, it says, Kritaya Dhyayato Vishnum. Then in the first stage, the process was Dhyayato, meditation. So which one of us can sit down and meditate and actually realize Krishna through the process of meditation? It's very difficult. And we see in previous ages, Valmiki Muni, how many tens of thousands of years did he meditate for? I think it was 60,000 years or something. And then he realized the Lord. Who can do that? Who's got 60,000 years to sit down and meditate? And who can do that? I mean, I know myself, even when I sit down, I try to focus when I'm chanting my japa. If I can get 5 mantras out that I'm focused, I'm doing really well. There's always some distraction. So it's not really conducive for this age. But when we sit down in front of Krishna, we have some sense. When we sit in front of the deity, we have some sense that this is Krishna. And the more we're able to cultivate that awareness that the deity is directly Krishna, the more Krishna will reveal himself to us in the deity and in every other way. As they surrender unto me, I reward them accordingly. So this is the process of deity worship. This is why it's so important for us. Jiva Goswami points this out. It's because the living entities are so conditioned, and their minds are contaminated. And the thing, this Jiva Goswami writes in his Bhakti Sandarbha. The Bhakti Sandarbha was about 450, 475 years ago. He's saying this back then, right? What's it like now? How disturbed are our minds? I mean, just look at how crazy the world's getting these days. People's minds are so disturbed. So deity worship is very, very helpful for us. It's very helpful for regulating disturbed minds. So that's why we see our acharyas very, very put a lot of emphasis on deity worship. But Prabhupada gave us guidance. Don't get too caught up in it. Understand the function. Understand how it purifies the heart. So it brings us to the point of chanting the holy name purely. That's our process, is we chant the holy name. But we need some help to purify ourselves. So, don't give up deity worship, keep doing it, but understand its function. It's to help us to purify our hearts. It's to help us to cultivate our relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But ultimately, we want to get to this point of realizing that Krishna is his name. He's not different from his name. The thing is with artis, if you look in the Hari Bhakti Vilas, I think it's the 11th Vilas, there's a description of the 64 items of worship. And in those 64 items of worship, it mentions Mangal Aarti, I think 4 times. But there's no description of what items are offered in the Mangal Aarti, because these aren't upacharas. The upachara, or the item of worship, is the arti. And you'll see when you go to different places, they offer different styles of arti. Just like here in Mayapur, for instance, if you look at the breakfast offering, there's what they call a dup arti after that, which is simply flowers, incense, and chamra. And in the summer, maybe a peacock fan. When you look at the full arti, we offer to Prabhupada every morning. The full arti for Prabhupada is incense, lamp, water in a conch, cloth, flowers, chamra, and possibly a peacock fan. But then you look at Nrsimha, what they offer to Nrsimha, lamps, flower, I think flowers they offer, and a fan. Yeah?
Chamra.
Yeah?
Chamra.
No chamra for Nrsimha, it's a fan. Yeah?
Pick up.
No, just a fan. It's a cloth fan. They have it on a stick and they just go back and forth like that. Yeah? Then if you go to Radharaman in Vrindavan, for instance, or any of the Goswami temples in Vrindavan, you'll see there's a different style of arti. So really, the arti, you'll find in different traditions, they offer different items in the arti, but the thing is we're all doing the same thing because we're all offering arti. The arti is the item of worship. So really, in a temple environment, there are standards we follow in ISKCON, like a dup arti has standard items, the regular arti, full arti has standard items, the Rajbhog has one extra lamp. Tulsi arti also has different items, incense, lamp, flowers. So at home, this will really depend on what you have, what items you have, what you can get in the country. Like for some countries, you'll find it very difficult to import peacock fans or chamras. They're actually illegal items. They're actually banned here in India and they're banned in other places as well. So you might just offer incense and lamp, or if you live in a block of apartments in any modern city in the world, you're going to have a lot of trouble offering lamp and flowers because the smoke alarm will go off. and the fire brigade will come to put your lamp out. So you might only be able to offer flowers. But the point is, we should be offering something. So it doesn't really matter. And and as Prabhupada said in Bhagavatam 4.8.54, actually Narad Muni says it, and Prabhupada elaborates on it. He's describing to Dhruva Maharaj that one has to worship the deity according to time, place, and available conveniences and inconveniences. And Prabhupada goes on to elaborate in the purport that what's available and convenient in one place may not be available and convenient in another place. So we see with our acharyas, there was always a degree of flexibility there. It wasn't just like, this was the rule, this is the only way you do it, and there's no other way of doing it. And even we see in ISKCON, you'll go from one temple to another, and you'll see there's different ways of offering deity worship. They have different ways, their timings are different, the preparations on the offerings are different, the way they dress the deities are different. So many things. The setup of the altar is different, the timings of things are different. The bulk offerings are very different. So it's perfectly okay to have flexibility in the worship. It's not that when I first took on this service in 2005, one senior devotee came to me and said, "Oh, great! Now you can travel all over the world and make it the same standard everywhere." And for me, that wasn't such an attractive option. I just thought that, from Krishna's perspective, this may not be so interesting to have it the same everywhere. It make it easy for pujaris who are traveling around because they go to any temple in ISKCON and they'll see the same standard of worship. But it's not necessary. And even like we see here the worship, just like, you've all been here a little while visiting Mayapur, and you can see the worship here is very elaborate and opulent. But is this practical to have this type of worship, say, for instance, in central London? Probably not very practical. Or even some of our smaller temples here in India just wouldn't have the finances, like the Abhishek we did 3 days ago. You know how much milk was offered in that Abhishek to the deities? 3,000 litres of milk. How many temples could even afford to buy 3,000 litres of milk at one go, let alone pour it over the deities? And what would you do with it all afterwards? I remember that when we installed the Panchatattva in 2004, after we'd finished, cleaning bathing the deities, cleaning the altar, and cleaning the deities down, and dressing the deities and everything, I went outside to see if there was any Chanamrita. And we had just in the Parikrama Marg, actually outside the Parikrama Marg, we had 2 big plastic rainwater or water tanks there. And I climbed up the platform and looked inside. There wasn't a drop of Chanamrita inside. Nothing. And we offered more than 5,000 litres of ingredients for the deities. So how many temples could do that in ISKCON? And what would you do with all the Chanamrita? If you offered 5,000 litres, in the temple where I live, maybe the devotees would drink 20 litres of Chanamrita. What would you do with the other 4,500 litres of Chanamrita? So according to time, place, available conveniences and inconveniences. You have to be practical. And as I said before, Prabhupada was a very practical person. You worship the deity according to what's practical locally. Doesn't mean we change the standards. The standards are set. Only Brahmins can worship the deity. That's just a rule. There's no other concepts from our acharyas on that. And cleanliness and punctuality must be there, and we treat the deity as a person, etc. These things are just standards. But in terms of the detail of what the offerings contain, how many offerings there is, for Gaur Purnima, there's a certain amount of offerings. For Jagannath, there's a certain amount of offerings. For Radha Krishna, there's a certain amount of offerings that need to be offered every day. But there can be variation in this. It's not like it's a set rule and everything has to be the same. And it's the same with the bulk offerings too. It really depends on what deities you're worshipping. One of the things we do specify, especially with temple worship, because ministry, we tend to focus on the standards of temple worship, because in people's homes, they're going to worship differently. In devotees' homes, my general tendency is when I visit people's homes, devotees' homes, is I just try to encourage them. I don't give too much information on standards because, sometimes devotees just don't have the capacity to worship the deities so well at home, and you don't want to discourage people. You want to encourage people. One of the things because we do a short course on how to give feedback here, or a lesson on how to give feedback. And one of the things about when you're giving devotees feedback on what service they're doing is they need to be left with a positive experience, not that they're feeling discouraged or upset as a result of what feedback you give them. So, and it's a bit of an art, and I'm learning more and more about it. I'm not so good at it sometimes, but but in the temple, there are certain standards of worship that need to be there, and we see that for instance, Srila Prabhupada, he wrote a letter to a devotee called Gunagrahi. He passed away a few years ago in Vrindavan, but in that letter, Prabhupada wrote to Gunagrahi, and he said that Radha Krishna worship is the ultimate pinnacle of deity worship, and there can be no lacking in terms of quality or opulence. So it means if you're in a temple that has Radha Krishna deities, then that needs to be a very, very high standard of worship. Sometimes you hear devotees give the opinion that actually Shaligram is the highest standard. But Prabhupada explained that Radha Krishna is the ultimate pinnacle, means there's nothing higher. And Radha Krishna are our Ishta Devatas, they're the deity of our Sampradaya. You'll see that all Gaudiyas, they worship Radha Krishna, ultimately. So this means that when you have Radha Krishna deities, it means the standard of worship has to be very high. And it means 6 artis and offerings a day, sometimes 5, but generally 6. Sometimes Prabhupada would suggest leaving out the Vaikalika Bhoga, which is the fruit offering after they wake up in the afternoon. But also it means the number of preparations on the offering. It should be very, very opulent. In Melbourne, Srila Prabhupada described to the devotees to feed Krishna like a hungry 16-year-old boy. So I don't know if any of the Prabhus here remember what it was like when they were 16. I can remember how much I used to eat when I was 16. And it's like a lot more than what I eat now. So it was huge amounts. And, but also it should be all, Prabhupada also said that the food for the deities, the offerings for the deities should be very opulent. The offerings for the devotees should be, Hare Krishna, should be very succulent, so it'd be tasty. But everything for Krishna should be very opulent. So, these are the types of considerations we look at because, in order to install deities in ISKCON, you need to get approval from the deity ministry, ISKCON Deity Worship Ministry. And these are the types of things we look at. At least I go through, the devotees who are doing the service of the deities. Are there any non-Brahmins engaged in that? If there's non-Brahmins, they say, no, you have to change this. You can't have non-Brahmins engaged in the worship. And I also look at the offerings. And oftentimes you'll see that they're feeding the deities like the deities are some type of tapasvis. They're eating all these dried sort of crackers and things like that. But Krishna is the supreme enjoyer. He doesn't perform tapasya. He doesn't follow a codicy. He doesn't follow any fasts. He's the supreme enjoyer. So feed him like the supreme enjoyer. Don't feed him like some kind of sage living in the forest who's only eating roots and leaves. Feed him like he's the supreme enjoyer. And that way my mother always used to say when I was growing up, she said, a way to a man's heart is through his stomach. Yeah? So if you please Krishna with nice offerings, you'll win his heart. Yeah? It's a simple process. You just have to please him. Any deities. As long as they're Vaishnava and Vishnu Tattva, we don't worship other personalities. We don't worship, generally speaking, we don't worship deities. There's a purport in the Chaitanya Charitamrita where Prabhupada, he speaks really strongly on this point. That he says, I'm just paraphrasing because I don't remember the exact wording Prabhupada used. He says, sometimes we, the members of the Krishna conscious movement, are criticized for our stance on Devata worship. And then he goes on to explain, but he says, but how can we encourage people, because we understand what the goal of life is. How can we encourage anyone to worship anyone but Krishna? Because you worship a Devata, what happens? Kama bandhana, you become bound up in this material world. If you worship Krishna or any of his expansions, you become liberated. And so we're not interested in worshipping deities or anything like that. So, but as I mentioned before, there's that purport in 2.3.22 where Prabhupada gives a whole list of the different types of deities we can worship. And it's quite extensive.
In regard to this question, basically I wanted to know that are Giriraj deities also allowed, like devotees bring Giriraji from over the
Yeah.
they worship?
Yeah. In the Krishna book, Prabhupada explains that, he talks, in that chapter about lifting Govardhan Hill and the worship of Govardhan Hill. Prabhupada explains that the devotees can take the deities and worship in their homes directly as Krishna. So that's the instruction of Acharya. We don't, even though Haridasa Varya was discussed by Raghunath Das Goswami, our founder Acharya says we worship as Krishna. Lord Chaitanya also instructed his followers to worship as Krishna. So that's our mood. You can worship at home, but worship as Krishna. It's not a problem, but just worship as Krishna.
So the same question continues. Like I've seen in many holy places, they keep Giriraj, Girirani, and a lot of varieties. So how this is done?
Yeah, but then if they're going to worship, Shilas from Govardhan Hill as Girirani, I'd like to see the praman, because there is no praman for it. Our founder Acharya said we worship as Krishna. So we are followers. Primarily we're Rupanugas, but primarily we're Prabhupada-nugas. We follow A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. He's our founder Acharya. And the Acharya gives the method of worship. He gives the deities we worship. He gives the method of worship. And so he has defined that we worship Giriraj as Krishna. So for me, there's the concept of worshipping as anyone else than Krishna is a speculation, because it's not supported by our founder Acharya. See, if you look at other sampradayas, you look at other groups within India, you go to Vrindavan, you see the Brajbasis, you go to Radha Kund and places like this, and you see some of the things they're doing there. It's so far away from what Prabhupada taught us. Prabhupada gave us everything we need for going back home to Godhead in one life. So you can follow that, or you can follow these other paths. What do you want to do? Do you want to go back home to Godhead in one life? Follow Prabhupada. Guaranteed. He said he'll deliver you. Krishna says he'll deliver you if you follow the processes. And Ranath Maharaj was making this point in class this morning. Mahajaniyena Katasapanta. You follow the path that's given by the great souls, you'll go back to Godhead. Because devotional service which is practiced without following the great souls will not be effective. But when we follow the devotional process which is given by the Mahajans, it says, how does it go? There's a particular word I'm looking at. Taka Pratishta Shutavi Nasho Yasham Damasha Tatvam Nihitam Guhayam. So Guha means like a cave. And Guhayam means like a secret. So that verse is translated in different ways. One of the ways I've seen it translated was very effective. It's explained as this Dharmasya Tattvam, the truth about Dharma. It's a secret that's within the heart of the Mahajans. So it's not something you can get externally. It's not something you can get by studying the scriptures or by performing your bratas or whatever. It's only through the mercy of the great souls that you can understand the truth of Dharma. So we come in the Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya, in particular, we come in line from Chaitanya Mahaprabhu through our Gaudiya Vaishnava Acharyas. And if we want to get the conclusion, if we want to achieve the conclusion of this Sampradaya, then we need to follow His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. And by following Srila Prabhupada, you'll very quickly achieve the goal. You can sit over there somewhere if you like, Maharaj. Hare Krishna. So that's, I've seen devotees worshipping Giriraj as Srimati Radharani. I've seen them worshipping Giriraj as Balaram. So many different personalities. But what's the praman for that? They don't have a praman, therefore it's a speculation. Everything we do must have a praman. Otherwise, how do you understand the devotional process? It just becomes, it's just like my son, he closed the school down now, but he had a yoga school. And, he's a strict follower of Bhagavad Gita. In his classes, he would always teach Bhagavad Gita in his yoga classes. But I'd also go to, some of the other people's classes because they were good teachers in yoga, and, it's helpful for health. But, you listen to the philosophy they teach, and it's just mental speculation. And so we also know that we see in there's a verse in the Bhagavatam where it says Harava Bhaktasho Kutu Mahadguna Manotena Siddhahavadabahir, that for one who's not surrendering to the lotus feet of Krishna, that they're not devotees. Therefore, they simply follow their own mental speculations. And so if we're not following the process that's given by the acharyas, that's given by the Mahajans, it's simply a mental speculation. Therefore, it will not deliver us to the lotus feet of Krishna. It won't, that's what I was saying before. You follow the rules that are given by the acharyas, you follow the guidance given by the acharyas, you'll achieve success. If you don't follow the acharyas, your destination's uncertain. So just follow the acharyas. That's the easiest way.
In continuation with this
Sorry?
question, we usually don't see Laddu Gopals in the temple, like temple premises, the Laddu Gopal deities. And if we go in the line of acharyas also, we don't have many Laddu Gopal deities with acharyas.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Once Srila Prabhupada was in Vrindavan, none of us would have told me this. Prabhupada was there in Vrindavan, and he called the pujari over, who was Omkar at the time. And he pointed to something on the altar. He says, "What's this?" And Omkar brought it out. It was a Laddu Gopal deity. And he explained that someone had given the deity to put on the altar, and Prabhupada said, "Take him out. This is not our sampradaya." So Gaudiya Vaishnavas, you'll see now some of the Gaudiya mutts have Laddu Gopals, but it's a recent addition because it's not part of our worship. You'll find generally Gujaratis worship Laddu Gopal, the Vallabhs. And even that, I'm not sure if it's a valid form of worship or not. I've heard different things which lead me to conclude that it might be somewhat concocted in their mentality of who he is. And I've heard it explained that this form of Laddu Gopal is Krishna before he became contaminated with his association with the gopis. I mean, it's such a deviant philosophy. It's so offensive to think that Krishna became contaminated by associating with the topmost devotees. It means they just don't understand the devotional process. They don't understand the greatness of the gopis and how they're completely surrendered to Krishna. So Acaman, who wrote this one? Is that, you mean sipping water?
Sipping one, and like at school, in our trust, initially our head pujari instructed, because in school it's too much going on.
At the Avanti school?
Yeah, Avanti school. So they just for like Keshvainama, Narayana, Madhvainama on the shoulder and feet, that's it, not the full one.
Yeah.
Sometimes at home they say just Om Pavitra, that's enough.
Well, I mean, there's two basic standards of Acaman. One is you sip the first three items. Keshvaya, Narayana, Madhvainama, that's it, done. Yeah? And the other one is you do the full Vaishnava Acaman with all the mudras and stuff like that, etc. Prabhupada generally would do just the first one with the three mantras, Om Keshvam, Narayana, Madhvaya. That's what he would do. When he did initiation yagas also, he would encourage the devotees just to do that, or he instructed them to do that. So either way is okay. But the thing is, like, we timed it the other day, didn't we? Another little when I did it, it took 10 seconds, was it? It takes like 10, 15 seconds to do full Acaman if you know how to do it. And like one of the things we do here is we train devotees to learn to be able to do these things without having to look at a mantra or a list on the wall. Because if you can look at the list on the wall, it takes you too long and you can't focus on what you're doing. Yeah. So it doesn't take long if you know how to do it. It just it doesn't take you long at all. Just a few seconds. Of course, you don't rush through it and it all becomes a blur. You have to look at the water, say the mantra, but less than a minute. And who can't spare a minute to purify the body? And as far and the idea is like with the Acaman, is you're infusing water into the body, you're ingesting water into the body that has been infused with mantra. So this then transcendentalizes the senses. But because the mantra is the name of Krishna, then it's because you're remembering Krishna and you're sipping that water by remembering Krishna, then you become purified both within and without.
So it's both equal, Om Pavitra, Pavitra, and 3 times.
Well, I wouldn't say that Om Pavitra is a valid means. You need to sip water with the mantra infused, and even you'll see, like, I guess in different sampradayas, or different groups, they do different things. For instance, at Radharaman and Vrindavan, their method of doing Acaman is they just take Charamrita. In Nathdwar, when I was there, I saw they had a brazier with coals, like red hot coals in it, and they'd throw frankincense on the coals and they'd wave the hands. So that purifies the hands. But in terms of sipping water, the idea is like you're performing a ritual, and the goal of the ritual is to purify the subtle. The idea is to purify both subtle and physical, and ultimately to transcendental because of the mantra. Because the mantra is the name of Krishna, and by ingesting the mantra that's infused with Krishna's name, the body becomes purified. Yeah.
This is in regard to when we are about to start deity worship. Like, but if we are just attending the nature call, or we just have our prasadam, after that we have a habit to do Acaman. So that quick Acaman should also be sipping the water.
See, after you eat or drink, you need to do Acaman. If you've touched your mouth during the process of eating or drinking, you need to change your clothes. Because the clothes become contaminated, because food particles mixed with saliva may fall on the clothes. You don't need to bathe. That's a misunderstanding. Oftentimes devotees think they need to bathe after they've eaten, but prasadam is not contaminating, prasadam is purifying. But because you've been eating and drops of prasad mixed with saliva may fall on your clothing and stuff, therefore you need to change your clothing. Yeah? So not necessarily bathe though. Yeah. But yeah, you do Acaman before going back on the altar. And it's like, if you see more experienced pujaris, what they tend to do is for instance, they need to take breakfast and they've got to go back on the altar. They'll take their clothes off, put on a gamcha, maybe a t-shirt, whatever, take prasad, wash their feet, rinse their mouth, wash their hands, rinse their legs basically up to the knees, put their clothes back on, do Acaman, and go back on the altar, completely pure.
So with the home deities and at home with kids, it is not always possible to keep changing.
But the thing is, once you become practice, see, we're trying to cultivate the mode of goodness, right? And like since I've been here, I've been having 2 or 3 showers a day. But today, just because of the circumstances, I couldn't do it. And I feel kind of all sticky. I don't feel comfortable. So by cultivating the mode of goodness, this enables us to more easily come to the transcendental stage. So we can offer excuses why it's difficult to be clean, but that comes from what mode of nature? What mode of nature is that? Huh? Raja, passion. Because of the activity I'm doing, I can't cultivate goodness. But we need to cultivate, if you want to go back to Godhead, if you want to achieve the transcendental state of devotional service, you need to at least cultivate goodness, because then you'll be able to understand. So it's easy to find excuses why not do these things. But once you start to cultivate and become more habituated to the mode of goodness, you'll find it very difficult not to do these things, because you'll feel uncomfortable, you'll feel dirty, you'll feel unclean. Yeah? I mean, just the act of changing your clothes, putting on clean clothes several times a day, you'll find that you feel much better as a result. You feel much cleaner, you feel much more peaceful in your mind and consciousness just by doing these things, just by bathing regularly. Because, there's a really interesting story in the, I think it's the 4th or the 5th chapter of the 1st canto, where, when Narad Muni, when he's with the Mahabhagavats, and he takes their prasad remnants, and then he sits down and, and his mother dies, and then he goes traveling for some time, and he's feeling very exhausted. He's been traveling for some time, and then he comes to a body of water, and he touches water, and he feels completely refreshed. Water has a very powerful effect on us. So, and, I know myself. Whenever I travel, the first thing I do whenever I get to a place is I go to the bathroom and I bathe. I just wash all that travel. And I know how many of you travel on planes regularly. I'm quite often on planes, and it's like there's such grimy atmospheres. Like the recirculate. You're stuck in this metal tube for like 12, 14 hours sometimes with all this recirculated air and people coughing and all their sweat and whatever's in the air. It's like a very contaminated situation. And just to go and have to bathe after you do that, it just washes all that contamination off. So I encourage you as much as you can, try to follow these rituals of purification. It will help your consciousness become more fixed in Krishna. It's really helpful. Yeah? The more you cultivate the mode of goodness, the more you'll be able to see the truth. Because one of the factors of goodness is illumination. You see things as they are. Passion is the symptoms of passion are intense longing and desire, and ultimately distress, because you don't get what you want. But goodness, you're satisfied. So when you weigh it up, what do you want? You want passion, you want goodness, or ignorance. Goodness is a much better situation to be in, because you become satisfied, you become peaceful. And in that condition, when you become satisfied and peaceful, you're able to achieve Krishna. Yeah? And it's like, you see, with most of these, well, actually all these senior devotees, at least the ones I associate with, they're far much more in the mode of goodness than I am. And you see, just like with someone like Radhanath Maharaj, he gave class this morning, he's a very peaceful person. Niranjan Maharaj is a very peaceful person. Yeah? That's because they've cultivated the mode of goodness. So, it's very, very helpful for our process, for the process of bhakti. Offences, really interesting thing. Offences are something we need to know about. Prabhupada in several places goes into detail about the offences in deity worship. In chapter 8 of the Nectar of Devotion, in Bhagavatam 7, 5, 23, 24, he also just discussed the offences. Also in the Madhya Lila chapter 24, around verse 334, 335, 336, one of those verses, he discusses the offences in detail. Yet, we see that he never really emphasized offences. He never really pushed on it. Rather, he, from my observation, he tended to be more proactive. Take the proactive approach. Rather, try to please Krishna by your service. And in some places, he listed the different things you could do to overcome the offences, such as chanting Vishnu Sahasranam, chanting a chapter of Bhagavad Gita, even worshipping the Shaligram. He said this is also helpful in overcoming offences. So it seemed that Prabhupada's solution to seva aparad was more seva. So he didn't tend to. It's good to know what the offences are so you can avoid these things, but I would say don't dwell on them too much. Be aware of what they are, be aware of how to avoid them, but don't get overly concerned or overly absorbed in them, because it can tend, this over-analysis of these types of things can lead to paralysis, and we don't do anything because we're too worried. I mean, I've seen this in different temples I've visited where devotees didn't want to do deity worship because they were worried about committing offences. It's, I wouldn't give it too much emphasis. Don't ignore the offences, because they have the capacity to affect our bhakti. If we're constantly committing offences, this can really affect our bhakti. But so don't commit offences, because this is one of the instructions that Lord Chaitanya gave to Sanatana Goswami when he was asking him to teach deity, write about deity worship, was show devotees how to overcome the offences, how to stop offences. But at the same point, don't become overly absorbed, in the offences. Okay, what do you think you should do?
How should we do prashita? Definitely, I feel very bad.
Well, I mean, sometimes you hear devotees talk about prashita, but say, for instance, I was, walking past you and I banged you. What would I do? Just keep walking and don't take any notice? I'd say sorry. So it's the same thing when you're doing deity worship. Like if you have this repentant mood, then this is going to be very, very helpful. But if you're just ignoring, then that's not very good. And even when you do the deity worship, at the end of the worship, we have this verse, Angahinam, Kriyahinam, Vidihinam, Krishna Kasha Prasad, Yad Kinchit Vaikaram Jatam, Tadosha Prashamanaya, Sri Krishna Smaranam Karomi. So thousands of offences are performed by me day and night. But thinking of me or your servant, my dear Lord, kindly, allow me to overcome these offences. Yeah? By remembering Krishna, we can overcome these offences. Yeah?
One is say instance like at our own trust, we were transferring the God's activities and we hurt their fingers.
Yeah.
So being mature, I've been asked to fast for half day and then praying and doing.
But you can do that if you want. You can do that. I mean, it definitely doesn't hurt to perform tapasya for the pleasure of Krishna. But the main thing is like, don't do it with a ritualistic outlook on it. I offend the deity, so I'm performing this tapasya. There needs to be some heart there. It's got to come from the heart, not just it's a ritual I do. Because you'll see oftentimes devotees, they do rituals. Just like, that interesting story, the Brahmana and the cobbler. You know that story? And the cobbler. Okay, so Narad Muni, he was on his way to Vaikuntha, and he met a Brahmana, and the Brahmana asked him, "Oh, dear Narada," he received Narada, offered him a seat and all this sort of stuff. "My dear Narada, where are you going?" "Oh, it's funny you should ask. I'm going to see Lord Vishnu in Vaikuntha." "Oh, that's so wonderful." "Narad Muni, while you're there, can you ask the Lord when I'm going to achieve liberation?" Narad Muni, of course, of course I'll do that. So then he goes on further, he meets a cobbler, someone who makes shoes. And so the cobbler, he's very poor, so he doesn't have much, but he offers him a place to sit in a glass of water. And the same kind of conversation comes up. And he also asks Narad Muni, to ask the Lord when he's going to be liberated. And then so Narad Muni goes and he sees the Lord. And then he asks the Lord about the Brahman and the cobbler when they're going to achieve liberation. And the Lord, he says to Narad Muni, the Brahmana, he's going to achieve liberation after many, many births. But the cobbler, he will achieve his liberation at the end of this life. And Narad Muni is a bit perplexed. He says, "My dear Lord, I don't understand. Why is this?" And he said, "They'll ask you what I was doing when you saw me. And you tell them I was threading an elephant through the eye of a needle backwards and forwards like this. And then you'll understand." So when he went to see the cobbler, first he went to see the Brahmana, and the Brahmana, he asked him, "Did you see Vishnu?" and all this sort of stuff. And he explained the whole thing. And he said, "And did you ask him when I was going to be liberated?" He said, "Yes, yes." And what did he say? He said, "You won't be liberated for many, many births." He says, "What?" He was shocked, because I've been doing these yagas and chanting mantras, all this for my whole life, and I'm not going to be liberated. I don't believe you went there. He just rejected the whole thing. And so Narad Muni was, okay. And then he went to see the cobbler, and that's right. He said the Brahmana also. He asked. He said, "What was Vishnu doing?" And he said, "Oh, he was threading an elephant backwards and forwards through the eye." He said, "Impossible. Nobody can do that." And then so he went and saw the cobbler. Similar kind of thing took place. But when the cobbler heard, about Vishnu, he was, "Oh, he's so wonderful." And then he said, "What was Lord Vishnu doing?" And he said, "Oh, Vishnu, he was threading an elephant through the eye of a needle backwards and forwards." And the cobbler said, "Oh, my Lord Narayan, he's so wonderful. He can do anything." And Narad Muni said, "You actually believe that he was doing that?" He said, "Of course, here I am, I'm sitting under a banyan tree. On the banyan tree, there's so many fruits. And every fruit, there's a tiny little seed. You know how big the seeds are in a fig? They're tiny." And he said, "If my Lord can fit a banyan tree into this seed, to thread an elephant through the eye of a needle is nothing." So he had faith. He wasn't caught up in the ritual. He actually had faith that Krishna is the Supreme Person of Godhead. So we don't do things just with a ritualistic approach. And this is becoming more and more common, I see, in ISKCON. That devotees are getting more and more absorbed in the ritual, but not more and more absorbed in the devotional aspect of it, because our worship needs to come from the devotional aspect. You know, we are servants of Krishna. He is my master. He is directly present before me as the deity. The more we can do that, the more we'll be effective in our service. And one of the things you can do is try to make arrangements so there's very separate arrangements for the deities things and very separate arrangements for your personal things. At home, we have like an offering plate, which is obviously for our altar. We don't have deities at home, we have a picture altar. And so we have very separate things, so there's no scope for mixing it up. But, you know, if they do become mixed up, you can wash them with, I mean, if you want to get really serious about it, you can use cow dung or cow urine or something like that to wash them, things like that. But, I mean, we're conditioned living entities. We're going to make mistakes. That's just part of being conditioned, you know.
Regularly don't happen. When it's festival, weekdays, evenings,
Yeah.
please come and then we can...
Yeah. But, you know, just try to be careful, but don't get too, as we say in Australia, don't get too bent out of shape over it, you know. It's try to avoid it as best you can. But, yeah. I mean, Prabhupada did make that thing that the deity should have he told this to Malati, they should have their own eating utensils, yeah. And try your best to keep them separate. Generally speaking, to worship the Shaligram, you need to be Brahman Diksha. Yeah?
Only one is Brahman Diksha, and so other cannot worship.
No, others cannot worship. Generally, you need to be Brahman. Prabhupada talks about that in various purports in his books about how Brahmanas would worship. He would refer to them as Narayan Shila. But yeah, it was quite common in Brahmin families. Generally, the Brahmins worship the Shaligram. If you don't have Brahman Diksha, generally you won't worship the Shaligram. I mean, it's a fairly clear rule, that one. Yeah. But it's interesting here is like sometimes Prabhupada would refer to as the Shaligram as Narayan, but here, when in the early days, when I think they were doing the worship up in it would have been in the ground floor of the Lotus building. The temple used to be under the Lotus building where Prabhupada's Vyasasana is now. And Prabhupada asked Janivas Prabhu to get a Shaligram. So he went to Navadvip. He didn't know what a Shaligram was at the time. And he went and bought a Shaligram from a shop. It turned out it wasn't a Shaligram. But then so Prabhupada showed him how to worship this Shaligram. And at one point, Janivas Prabhu was asking Prabhupada, he said that, you know, Prabhupada, sometimes devotees are saying that the Shaligram is Narayan. And then Prabhupada said, forget some people say, I am saying he's Krishna. Yeah? So we worship the Shaligram as Krishna. And actually later on, Prabhupada told the president of Mayapur at the time to tell Janivas to get a flute for the Shaligram. So if you go on the altar, you'll see Janardhan, who's at the lotus feet of Radha Madhava, he has a flute always. Yeah? So in ISKCON, we worship the Shaligram as Krishna. Of course, you can worship the Shaligram as any deity. I mean, sometimes devotees will identify Shaligrams as this deity, that deity. Generally speaking, the majority of Shaligrams are identified as Ananta, you know, but you can worship as any deity, so as the Lord of your heart. And in ISKCON, our Lord is Krishna. Yeah. And he's not Radha, and he's Krishna. But you can worship the Shaligram as any Vishnu Tattva, but we worship as Krishna generally.